Welcome everyone to this online event on the topic of building a data science heavy startup. My name is Peter Jagan and I am hosting startup track of the DataFest conference 2020. For those of you who don't know, DataFest is a conference organized by Open Data Science, a data science community. Right now it's almost 50,000 members across the globe. Today I'm talking to Nikola Mrkšić, who is a co-founder and the CEO of PolyAI, a company behind enterprise-level voice assistants. It's a pleasure to have you here, Nikola.
Thank you for having me.
Amazing. So to kick off, maybe you can tell a bit more about yourself, just to introduce yourself and maybe to tell what PolyAI is about.
Absolutely. Hi everyone, pleasure to be here. My name is Nikola Mrkšić. I'm the CEO of PolyAI. PolyAI is at this point a 3-year-old startup based in London, UK, with offices in Singapore and in the US. We work on building enterprise-level voice assistants for customer service. So multi-turn, primarily voice, but also omni-channel assistants that help large enterprises massively improve their customer service by always being available, dealing with relatively simple problems really quickly and expediently, improving NPS scores, first call resolution, and all the other stuff that matters for a customer service estate. A bit about me, I got into conversational AI by taking a job at another Cambridge spinout called VocalIQ. We're Cambridge spinout. We started out of the University of Cambridge, where I met my co-founders. We did our PhDs together. We've got a large team of conversational AI researchers. And of course, I would say this, but I think it's the strongest independent team outside of large tech companies doing voice-based conversational AI. And we started in 2017, and before that, I was the first employee of another Cambridge spinout called VocalIQ, which was acquired by Apple in 2015 to make Siri a bit more conversational. I quit Apple in 2017 and started PolyAI, and our focus has been really for the first 2 years on turning a lot of the technology that we developed over our PhDs, things like, fully data-driven language understanding, reinforcement learning for dialogue management. Our CTO and my co-founder, Sean, proposed the first LSTM model for natural language generation. So we spent a lot of time picking and choosing and then productizing parts of that technology that make our technology stack really differentiated. And then about a year ago, we started working with large enterprises to really help them revamp their customer service. And at this point, we've got several really big and impressive logos that are working with us on, things from telco, hospitality to banking. My background before that, I grew up in Serbia, went to a highly specialized mathematics high school, and after that went to Cambridge, computer science and maths. For a bit, I thought I'd end up in investment banking, and I think that was the part of me that rebelled against being a nerd and wanted to wear a suit. Thankfully, my master's supervisor, Zubin Garamani, a legendary Bayesian machine learning researcher, pointed me towards VocalIQ, and I ended up joining them instead of the investment bank that I planned to join, and my life took a turn that led me to here. But in any case, really happy to be here, and happy to kind of dive into any area that your listeners are most interested in.
Awesome. One of the very interesting questions is actually, what did motivate you to continue with entrepreneurship? For instance, after VocalIQ, you could return to academia, for instance. There are a lot of people who are quite successful as researchers with nice page scores, with nice citation scores, right? So they join startups, let's say, as advisors, as consultants, but you decided to join a startup, to launch a startup as an operational guy, you as the CEO, right? What did motivate you?
For sure. I've not written a line of code in 3 years. And before that, I competed in programming contests. I got a silver from the Balkan Olympiad in informatics. So I love algorithms. I love all that stuff. It's not at all. I think I've always had diverse interests. And I guess on one level, it's personal, right? After I worked at Vocal IQ, I realized that, there's something really good about working at a small startup. The sense of ownership and the, camaraderie, the feeling of working on something with people, it's not really that frequent in academia. Academia has its own metrics, right? You mentioned it, like citations, things that are quite individualistic. But really, unless you're working on a very small problem where you can do everything on your own, it's a sport, right? It's a team sport, and it's a team effort. And dialogue systems in particular are one messy area of work. And they are much more engineering than they are science. And when you think about, the problem of building what in academia we call a task-oriented spoken dialogue system, something that helps you achieve a particular task, it's not really defined how you build it, how you evaluate it, what it means to build a good one, right? When you think about speech recognition, the task is very clear. You say something, and in most languages, there's exactly one way of writing it down, and you can evaluate, right? In image recognition, you may have 100 different kinds of objects, and you classify them, and it's very clear what the metric is. But for dialogue, it's a set of composite tasks from understanding to dialogue management and response generation, and it comes with a bunch of metrics that, when applied in different places, mean different things. Like, say, if you look at virtual assistants like Siri or Alexa, different people will judge them very differently. It's not clear when they're good and when they're bad, and you'll hear very conflicting opinions. When you narrow it down to things that we do now, customer service, even there you'll get disagreement between people. Some people will be very happy that they managed to do the task that the assistant helped them with quickly, and they'll be very happy from both the CSAT score, like whether they did the task, and an NPS score of whether they had a good experience. Where someone else might agree that they accomplished the task, but they didn't like the experience because they love chit chat with human agents, and they don't like the fact that their service supplier forced them to speak with an automated agent. Now, we believe that already we're surpassing the average agent quite a bit, and I think that we're well on our way to producing automated agents that are as good, if not better, than the best of the agents. But back to your question, really, for dialogue, you need to throw yourself onto the problem, right? And if you're working in academia, you end up working on a small subset of the problem. Say, my PhD was on language understanding, and I worked on scaling these things both to be more data-driven in a very kind of like deep learning fanatic manner, but also on scaling them across languages. So if you trained it on, say, English and German, or just English, maybe you can apply it to German, Italian, and Russian straight away. Or, maybe you can train it on 2 out of those, and the third one will improve. And those are fun problems. They're really fun problems, right? And when you work on your own, they're good problems to work on because you can evaluate and you can write a paper, and people cite you and you feel good about it. And as you said, these days you can be an advisor to startups. You can work at large, industry labs, places like DeepMind, Google Brain, that will pay you very, very well. They'll pay you a lot better than a startup will. But frankly, you don't get to solve the problem, right? It is an impossible task to build a group of, like a few dozen people and say like, hey, I'm going to build a voice assistant that does this really well. And that gets me going. That gives me a kick because, there are 14,000 people at Alexa, right? And I think that the fact that, we're building something much more narrow, but hey, if with 30 people we can serve 5 different enterprise clients and be well on our way towards creating our own platform that will serve hundreds, I can think of nothing better that I could be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an amazing motivation, I would say, at least to my mind. And the idea itself, I understand that was definitely affected by your research, by your PhD, but you mentioned PhD was much more specialized, right? So you probably could apply it to many different things like text summarization, maybe something else, etc., etc. How did you come up with voice assistants, especially a voice assistant that target customer service? Was it an iteration, or it was like an idea, a light bulb?
So I mean, with in terms of what we worked on during our PhDs in our group, we really have our supervisor, Professor Steve Young, to thank. Steve founded the world's first dialogue systems group at Cambridge in 2006, back when word error rates for speech recognizers were 25%, if not higher. So 1 in 4 words would be messed up, and typically would be the word that you care about the most when parsing meaning. So Steve built up a group, a machinery, a mathematical formalism based on POMDP-based reinforcement learning. He worked with different students on advancing natural language understanding, dialogue management, natural language generation. And, we, I think, joined at the right time, both my 2 co-founders, Sean, Eddie, and me. And, I think we came in at the right time. We came in when deep learning was just kind of like taking off in exactly the right way. And we were there to introduce a lot of those methodologies to dialogue systems first. And then, when we started the company, we knew we had a really good tech stack for voice assistants, for spoken dialogue systems, right? And over time, we really just looked for the biggest market. And customer service is second to none there. And then, it's just basically over time we had to develop all the other motions, the sales motion, the marketing motion. We're still developing a lot of that. But, we did have a lot of the degrees of freedom were just removed for us because of the fact that we had already invested together in this particular area.
I see. And in the description of PolyAI, there is a very specific word, enterprise ready. So can you explain a bit more for the audience, how does an enterprise ready tech is different from just B2B software, let's say?
Well, by definition, B2B software where you're selling, especially kind of like to large enterprises, has to be enterprise ready, right? And what that really means and why we stress that is voice assistants, if you think about, Alexa, Siri, Google Assistant, they do a bunch of things. They do some of those things well, and sometimes they just don't respond. Or sometimes they respond with something completely random. And these are far from completely machine learned systems, right? Now, we came from a very deep learning fanatical background where we would, build things that learn from data entirely and produce answers just based on previous examples and the outside world. And turning that into an enterprise-ready thing where the customer can be completely assured of the system doing exactly what they want it to do, on brand, with the right brand voice, it's a hard thing. And, really, when you think about voice automation and chatbots, you might think they're related, and they are related in some of the core technology, but in terms of the actual deployment motion, they're totally different. Like chatbots are the tip of the iceberg. They're something that a company deploys to increase what is known as deflection, basically to deflect people away from their contact centers and the agents taking those calls. And if people go to the website and, a chatbot pops up, they ask a question and get an answer, that's great. That person would have called and, cost the company a lot more money. Now, when you think about voice, people who call are people who don't want to use the latest kind of technology. They're not digital natives by and large, although every age group prefers calling if their call will be serviced by a good agent straight away. Now, if you think about then the enterprise readiness, it really is measured in the ability not just to, have a really good AI-powered interaction for the majority of clients, but also to very confidently and quickly decide not to have an automated interaction for those clients which are not likely to have a really good experience. And we do that, right? We, after a month into a deployment, we typically get to at least 80% success rates with the AI system. But, at different points in the conversation, we will pass people on to the human agents simply because, we don't want to sacrifice user experience. We want this to be, a net positive over a really well-staffed contact center filled with agents that are really well trained. We don't want it to be a pure cost-cutting play because, at the end of the day, we've invested a lot of our lives in this technology, and we don't want it to be something, we don't want it to be the second generation of IVR systems, right? Where you listen to an automated voice telling you that you can go and check something on the website. We want it to be a delightful experience. And, the thing that's really exciting is the moment where at the end of the call, you hear a chuckle by someone who may be a bit older, not used to these things. And they're like, I just booked through a robot. That's amazing, right? And it's like, that's really something special. And that means you're enterprise ready. When it's not someone who grew up with Alexa using it. It's someone who might not even, it might be their first encounter with an automated, voice assistant, and yet, they go through the experience smoothly.
And there is an interesting aspect of enterprise readiness, I guess, is understanding of very specific demands. Sometimes these demands relate to a pricing model. Sometimes these demands are about a certain purchasing practices, cybersecurity certification, a lot of like small details. So I'm curious, what were the biggest insights that you discovered from your customers, maybe within the first 6 or 12 months of building a PolyAI? Something that you really maybe did not expect, or maybe just didn't pay attention to initially, and then through this work with customers, you found it.
Yeah, I think that what we didn't expect and what's really turned things around for us in the best positive way, and with COVID actually it's even reinforced it, is that people are ready for this and people are curious. There are a lot of buyers out there right now who would love to try this out. Right? It's magic, right? You're deploying talking machines that can actually deal with these problems really, really effectively. And the other thing is we've underestimated. I think that when we launched our first deployment, and it was a restaurant reservation scenario for a large restaurant group here in the UK, I expected that we might be able to deal with 30% of the clients. And, we were afraid of people who are, the anti-digital natives. And what really surprised us is that the general population is ready. Like, the young people actually have the least interesting conversations, because they go and they're like, I want to transfer money to this person, to Peter Jagan. Okay. How much money? 20 pounds. Like, very clear, very boring. They know how to use the system to make it work really well. But then you get someone, I would like to book something for 3 to 4 people. I'm thinking 4 people, not 3. And they don't get what they just did to that NLU engine, right? They gave it it's at the very forefront of what you can deploy. And the truth is, as data starts flowing, like, you improve really quickly, way more quickly than we ever expected, because, in academia, we spent a lot of time getting smart about how to collect data, how to improve quickly. But when you open the floodgates, when you get to having, thousands of people using it daily, and you create like a good way for it to learn from those interactions without massive manual annotation, it improves so quickly. And the quality of real data is so much better that, as a researcher, your eyes light up. It's amazing. And I think that, some of my colleagues who previously worked at Google on different problems and experienced similar things, it's something that people get hooked on. And it's really good when you find a way to get that data.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a very interesting point, the opening of that Pandora box of data. What we see frequently as investors and in the community as well is that getting to this first POC or pilot, or the first customer who is ready to share some data, is super difficult. How did you get through this journey?
I mean, if you're any company, just like many ninja moves. Don't be afraid to try absolutely everything you can, because you'll be surprised with, some doors will open that you didn't expect. In our case, the first deployment came through a call center that we had, even at one point tried to acquire, and we built a really close partnership with them. And then through that, we got to our first client, and that was really surprising. Now, when it comes to data, I'm completely with you. People will not share data, that you need to just use a completely supervised machine learning framework to train and get a really good product. In fact, a lot of the people are getting really wise about the value of their data, not just about the legal implications, which are absolutely humongous and growing and getting more and more difficult, right? Like, in an enterprise setting, the fear of GDPR is huge, or Privacy Shield in the US. But it is what it is. And the good thing is, in Dialogue, we always worked with really small data sets, because we could never afford to produce really large data sets, right? So even if it was crowdsourced, or if we paid real people to use it, we spent our lives surviving off of data sets of a few hundred, at best a few thousand examples, right? So after we raised our seed funding, I actually felt like we were, in a position of a really rich group leader who was able to, pay for getting a lot more data. Now, you don't need that much data if your algorithms are not that data hungry. Now, the key thing for deep learning overall is pre-training, right? And one thing that is a key differentiator of our tech stack is our convert encoder. And, I think many people would point Convert out as the strongest kind of pre-trained representation for conversational AI. It performs a lot better than BERT. It's a lot smaller. And when you use it as the basis of your, deep learning framework for language understanding, intent recognition, value extraction, response generation, everything that you have to do in dialogue, it performs really well because we pre-trained it on Quora, Reddit, Twitter, anything that's half conversational, right? And because we pre-trained it so well, we're able to then use just a few hundred examples to get it to be really good in a particular application. And I won't go into details, but we model context, and that's really important for dialogue. But it basically means that in a new use case, we can mock up the data. And in our case, any customer is willing to let us shadow their agents, right? We're not taking any information away. We don't hear anything particularly confidential. We just see how the interaction goes. And that's enough to mock up a small data set. We use that data set to get to a basic level of performance that's pretty good, but not ideal. And then we'll let the system out in the wild. And often it's actually the user experience that you have to put more work into than this mythical, improvement of the machine learning models. Often they're good enough to begin with, but you have to think really carefully around the experience design because, people might just say things in ways that you don't expect.
I see. I think it's very important to highlight this wider context. You mentioned user experience.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm sure that there are some other themes or topics that a founding team should pay attention to.
For sure. So you mentioned enterprise readiness, right? And I think that's no joke, right? In choosing your target verticals, customers, clients, especially in the very early days, you pick how you're going to get your proof points, right? And if you're doing something really difficult and impressive and you have a strong team and strong, references in academia and product development from big tech companies where you've done the right relevant things, there's a lot of money out there right now, more than there's ever been in terms of venture capital. And I think especially at seed, there are people willing to double down and support, motivated people, even if they're not proven serial entrepreneurs, right? And I think that's really good. But, then subsequently, if you're going to pick enterprises, then, those InfoSec questionnaires, the, security, all of that stuff, maybe you don't want to go and sell into financial services first, right? Maybe you want to start off in a sector like hospitality, where there isn't such, or retail, where there isn't such a high regulatory barrier, right? But that is highly dependent on the industry that you operate in.
And what was your approach, maybe your mental model, your framework towards prioritizing first sectors and industries and then customer sizes? You mentioned that you started with a relatively small call center, right?
We partnered with a small call center to address a pretty large customer, right? So it wasn't necessarily a small customer. And in general, we don't target particularly small customers because you're either you can't be in the dead zone of enterprise sales, right? Like anything under 100,000 isn't worth having a sales force with salespeople and solutions architects, coming in and scoping out even minor tweaks to your overall product. You're either selling API calls or, asking for relatively large commitments. At the moment, we're asking for relatively large commitments, and internally, we've got a platform which allows us to build dialog systems faster and faster and faster. And at some point, we may open it up to other people. But, in our thinking, when we started, there were all sorts of things going through our minds, right? Do we productize a very, very narrow application where other people can then integrate it in different places? Or do we go and try to get and win that customer ourselves and we, really work and develop that, commercial engine and that kind of muscle? And we did that, right? We decided to do it because it's a complex value chain. There are big upfront investments, and it takes a bit of selling the magic. People are interested, they're willing to try, but they're not killing themselves trying to, build it themselves. And those who tried, by and large, failed or built chatbots that didn't do much for them. So, now we're in the first hype cycle is past, and conversational AI is it's not really doing this, but it stopped exploding in the same extent. But voice is the next frontier. Voice is what will make it do that again. And, I think we're at the forefront of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I see your logic right now. Thanks. And there is probably one of the things that at least I personally admire in researchers is some of them are very stubborn, like classical Jeff Hinton, right? Nobody believed in deep learning, and voila,
for sure,
it came up at the end of the day. At the same time, sometimes this stubbornness may maybe limit some flexibility or limit an ability of a founder to listen customers, for instance, potential customers, enterprises, collect feedback. What's your heuristic? What's your approach towards filtering out advice from a customer or from an investor? Because investors like to advise as well. So how do you decide where do you stick to your vision as a founder, and when you maybe change something, maybe listen to advice? How do you approach that?
I mean, I think that there is the classical early stage mistake of believing that investor feedback is the right gradient to follow and finding the right client. It is a mistake that I think everyone sometimes follows for a bit, and you shouldn't do that for too long when you start a company. Obviously, the earlier you are, maybe your ideas are more shocking to the average investor. That's fine. Find the right investor, right? Otherwise, you're going to have board meetings where you have to explain why this is important and why this is cool, even if they end up investing for this or that reason. I've been really fortunate with my investors. They understand the space. Our seed round was led by Herman Hauser from Amadeus Capital, and Herman is one of the founders of ARM, and he was the first check then into ARM afterwards from Amadeus. And before that, he founded a company called Acorn. He's got a PhD in physics from the Cavendish Lab at Cambridge, and he's way smarter than I am. So it's not really hard to talk to Herman for a while and end up talking about the topological properties of 10,000 dimensional spaces. So obviously, he loves technology, and that's why he invested at seed stage. At Series A, we got 0.72 and Science Capital. Passion Capital also invested in our seed round, and they're a really thoughtful and patient investor as well. So, we never had those issues. And then, at Series A, we had 0.72 and Science Capital. They're both large investment firms in the US. And, I think that they've really helped us think about how to build that commercial engine, connect us with the right people, etc. But I'm digressing. We're talking about listening to customers, right? And customers, you just have to talk to a lot of customers, right? I would say that, if we're talking to a group of machine learning people here, is be frequentist, don't be too Bayesian, because frankly, if you're a tech founder, like I am, right? If you come from a technical background and your prior is probably not that good, right? And you shouldn't believe it's very good. So just go get that. Be Bayesian, but don't stick to your prior. Go get a lot of data, because, if you're very Bayesian about it and you have a pathological prior, you get 2 data points and you come up with some conclusion, and then you build a solution for it for 6 months without actually validating it. That's bad, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're a team of people who are all technologists, make sure that you have at least one shameless extrovert who's going to end up talking to everyone about, the solution, who's going to learn really quickly. You have to learn really quickly, because as a tech person, you're not really ready or equipped to do everything that you're going to have to do. So, I think be curious. These are now I sound like a new age life guru, but be curious. Work a lot, change, explore very quickly, very radically, surround yourself by very different people, and iterate on that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's to me an amazing advice. And talking about learning and iterating, I do think at what point there is a sense, there is really sense to, let's say, hire a commercial person? When does that point, in your opinion, appears? When a founder needs to delegate sales or maybe even product work? And
Never.
Mm-hmm.
Never. It depends, right? Ideally, when you're co-founding a company, like I don't think it's right to have, purely tech people as co-founders. We did that, and I think that, I know some teams where that wasn't the case, and they bring that different perspective and experience and wealth of knowledge and contacts, and that's just good, right? Like that's not a bad thing at all. If you can get a serial entrepreneur into either the co-founding team or the early stage team, that's also really good because they're just going to help you around how you build a team and that dynamic. You can't outsource sales. You can only do that when you've already built up a really good commercial engine, right? And that's going to be someone in the very early team, right? So you can't outsource the search for product market fit ever. It has to be on everyone's mind, of all co-founders, because maybe one of you is covering tech, one is covering product, one is covering sales. Like they're all like signals bringing you towards good product market fit. Of course, I think some people get super lucky with an early hire who ends up being a really good salesperson or VP of sales. But like sales is a science. People, I think that scientists don't appreciate how scientific and data-driven sales is, especially for B2B. It is an exact science with very clear expectations from people. It is a hard job where there are a lot of really smart, charismatic, creative people. It's hard to pick the right ones. You're not ready to pick the right ones, so don't expect that you will pick the right one the first time around either, right? And again, be ready to iterate, but also like be fair to people, communicate with people. Tell them what you expect. Be very open about it because you're not gonna, I think that a lot of technical founders just imagine like, oh, I know this person, he's very charismatic or she knows a lot of people, they're gonna be great at sales. Like, no, why? Like, find people who've sold to the kind of people that you want to sell to, right? And the first deal, frankly, you can get it yourself because founder-led sales, you've got a lot more passion about it. No one cares about it succeeding more than you do. So just go hit the pavement, work.
Thanks. It's interesting. And probably before we close, maybe just two other questions. First one is, did I miss something? Is there any important question, topic, or theme that we didn't cover with you, but you believe that it's important to talk about and to mention it at least?
That is.
We've talked about fundraising, we've talked about market fit, about sales, about ideation. Maybe there is something that we really...
Yeah, I think okay, here's one. I think that if you start with a very strong technical team, try not to over-engineer things initially, because the tendency for over-engineering on the technical level, if you're a strong technical team, is a constant danger that you're going to have to fend off. So yeah, I mean, it's not rocket science, but I think I know a lot of people who've done a bit of that. It's not fatal usually, but it's just one thing to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. And the last one, what would be your single advice to a founder, potential founder who is a data scientist by the background? The most important thing.
I don't know. I mean, I've only founded one company. I think like pick your co-founders really well and think about the right dynamics between the co-founders. Make sure that you clearly define the roles and expectations. And I think that's really important because, I would not have gotten where I am without my co-founders. And like they're your bedrock, your shoulder to cry on. They're really important, right? And, often I see people with weird configurations of, like people with weird roles and like that will hurt you at fundraising as well. I mean, you could probably talk about that a lot better than I can. And I'm sure you've seen all sorts of things, but, just like strip away your ego. I mean, you're not going to get rid of it. It's probably the main thing driving you, right? If you're a startup founder. So like get very intimate with your ego. Think about what it is you want to do and what's going to make you happy because you'll be doing it for a long time if you're successful. So think about what you want to do. Think about what your co-founders want to do, define it well, You know, if you want to do the same things and you both want to be the CTO or the CEO, like that's not going to work. You need to be able to really appreciate each, co-found with someone you admire, right? And ideally you admire them for something that you know you're not amazing at. And then, you know, you're complementary. Yeah, probably that.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Nikola, for this talk. And I'm sure we will hear a lot of good news from you and from PolyAI.
I hope so too. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.